And all right, it's good to see everyone. We were just touching base about the rally yesterday, and even before that, wishing Jules Fink a happy 95th birthday today. So it's nice that his daughter there got him a hat and got the background there with the balloons. So bis 120, Jules, in good health. 95. Poo poo poo.
Ah,
Yeah. So we, I want to make sure everybody stays muted, and unless you have a question or a comment. So I'll talk a little bit about the rally on Shabbat morning. It was a very powerful experience to be there. Um, Last time I had done anything like that, I was in rabbinical school when we came down in 1987 for the Soviet Jewry rally. So this was quite the experience. All right, the portion this week is Toldot, and in Eitz Chaim, we're on page 146. In whatever edition of Chumash you're using, Genesis chapter 25, beginning with verse 19. What I wanted to do today, I'll say the bracha in a moment. I want to read through at least the first part of the portion to kind of highlight some things there about Isaac and Rebekah and the birth of Jacob and Esau. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So again, we're on 146, Genesis chapter 25, beginning with verse 19. Ve'ele toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham. Avraham holid et Yitzchak. So the Eitz Chaim translates the word toldot as story. It's history. It could be translated as history. It could be the line of, like this. These are the histories of. It's a plural word. So the English has this is the story, but the Hebrew is plural. These are the generations. These are the lines. These are the history. So history being a plural word then. Of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham gave birth to or begat Isaac. Vayehi Yitzchak ben arba'im shana bekachto et Rivka bat Betuel ha'arami mipadan Aram achot Lavan ha'arami lo leisha. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, daughter of Betuel, the Aramean, from Padan Aram, the sister of Lavan, the Aramean, to him. So he took her to him as a wife. So I just want a tangent here about this. So we're supposed to remember who Rivka is, because at the end of Vayera, 2 portions ago, we're introduced to Rebekah after Isaac and Abraham come down Mount Moriah. So if you just switch back to page 122 for a moment, you'll see we're introduced to Rebekah there in verse 23. Okay, and then we are reminded again of Rebekah in the portion Chaye Sarah, when the Abraham's servant goes searching for a wife for Isaac back in the home country. Okay, so this is that Rebekah again that we're being reminded of, right? The end of last week's portion, they got married. The question is, how old is Isaac at the time that he was taken up to Mount Moriah? Because it's based on Midrash, where the portions are kind of put close together and they run, according to the Midrash, in consecutive order with no time in between. So we don't know how old Isaac is when Abraham takes him up the mountain. We do know how old Abraham and Isaac are when they give birth, when he is born. Okay, so Abraham is 99, Sarah is 90 when Isaac is born. Okay, and then in the beginning of the portion Chaye Sarah, which according to the rabbis happens right after or at the same time that Isaac is taken up to Mount Moriah, we're told that Sarah dies at age 127. Okay, so according to the Midrash, a Midrash, not the Midrash, according to a Midrash, Sarah dies having heard what Abraham and Isaac were doing on Mount Moriah. She heard that Abraham took him to offer him as a sacrifice, and that news was so overwhelming to her that she died. So according to that Midrash, then, Isaac must have been 37 years old when he was up on Mount Moriah with Abraham. Now, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem to make sense from the story itself of Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, because it seems first Isaac is referred to as a Na'ar, and the Hebrew term Na'ar is a young boy, like a teenager would be a Na'ar, not a 37-year-old. So an adult who's of the age to get married and older is not referred to as a Na'ar. Okay, so it's somebody in their teens. So that doesn't seem to make sense based on the chronology. But again, that's Midrash. And then his age given here at age 40, well, that could make sense with last week's portion when Sarah dies at age 127, that whole process could have taken 3 years from her death, from her burial, from her mourning, to then Abraham saying, you know what? It's time to find a wife for my son. And that whole trip that would have taken a few months' time as well. So that saying here that he's 40 years old when they got married, that makes sense. Okay, so he's 40 years old, but that age is important because we're going to get an age again very soon. He's 40 years old when he took Rebecca as a wife. Verse 21, Vaye'etar Yitzchak la'Adonai lenochach ishto ki akarahi vaye'ater lo Adonai vatahar Rivka ishto. So Isaac pleaded with God in the presence of his wife. It says here on behalf of his wife, but it can also mean in the presence of his wife. So they're together, and he's pleading with God because she is barren. Okay, another example. So Sarah's barren, and 3 angels come to Abraham and Sarah to tell them that in a year's time a baby will be born. Now, in this version of the barren woman story, Rebecca is barren, and Isaac, in her presence, pleads with God, and God, Vaye'ater lo Adonai, so God responded to the plea, and Rebecca conceived. Rebecca, his wife, conceived. Okay, so a different version of the barren story, barren woman story, where there are several barren woman stories in Genesis. Each generation deals with a barren woman, right? Sarah's barren, 3 angels come. Rebecca's barren, Isaac prays for her, and God makes her conceive. Rachel is barren, and there are elements there that we'll get to in a couple weeks in next week's portion, which respond to her barrenness there as well. And then there are other barren women stories in the later parts of the Bible as well. So each time there's a little bit of difference in response to the woman's barrenness and the miracle that happens on their behalf. Okay, verse 22. Vayitrotzatsu habanim bikirba, vatomer im kain lama ze anochi, vatelech lidrosh et Adonai. So the boys were running around, yitrotzatsu. So it's translated as struggling. Maybe it's struggling, but larutz, which is the root here, larutz means to run. So they were jumping up and down. They were active. The boys were active inside of her. How do we know they're boys? We're just, right? She's pregnant, and now we're told there's plural. We assume it's one. She's pregnant with one. Now we're told that not only is she pregnant, she's pregnant with twins, and that they're boys. Okay, well, we weren't told that in answer to that when God made her conceive, that God put twin boys inside of her. So there's just a little bit missing in the detail here. So the boys were running around inside of her, were active inside of her. And she said, if so, why am I? Lama ze anochi. Why am I now? Or why is this now? Or why am I this? Lama ze, why am I this? The English translates it as, why do I exist? So I'm not sure that that's the import, that's the impact of those 3 words. Lama ze anochi. Why was I chosen for this? Like, why am I putting up with this? Or why did God make me put up with this? So vatelech lidrosh et Adonai. So she went to ask of God or inquire of God. Okay, so fascinating cryptic detail here, right? So she's barren. She doesn't go to plead with God. Isaac goes to plead with God. She becomes pregnant, then she has a voice. She had a voice in last week's portion. Rebecca had a voice in last week's portion in which she agreed to Abraham's servant to go back with him to marry Isaac. So she has a voice there. She has no voice here for the first few sentences, right? So if she's going to plead with God in verse 22, so if she has that personality, that if something is going on with her, she's going to ask for God, why didn't she plead with God in verse 21? I think that's a reasonable question to ask about the details of this story. Why is Isaac praying for her? And then in 22, that's in verse 21, in verse 22, now Rebecca is taking matters in her own hand. Okay, so perhaps this is like a typical husband-wife relationship. The wife gives the husband a to-do list, and the husband does it in whatever way the husband can. Husband comes home, and wife reacts to what was accomplished on the to-do list and is frustrated by one of the things on the list that wasn't done according to her standards. So in an exasperated way, she says, okay, I'll do it myself. I tried to pawn this off and to have you do this for me to save some time, but you failed and I have to do it myself. So that's one way of seeing what happens here. Rebecca says to Isaac, oh, well, you have a history of having a connection with God. Something happened to you on Mount Moriah, and so you have a relationship with God. Maybe you can do something to make me fertile. And Isaac says, okay, I'll see what I can do. So Isaac pleaded with God. And so God said, this is Isaac. I saved him from his father's knife. I'll answer his question, but I'll give him an extra reward for doing it. Not only will his wife be pregnant with one child, she'll be pregnant with two children. So Rebecca responds, perhaps she responds this way, I asked you to talk to God. I didn't expect that I'd be answered in this way. All right, so we can laugh a little bit about what's going on here, right? Because, we're doing this because the Hebrew just causes us, the verses themselves cause us to ask this question, right? If Rebecca is already responding to her own situation of being pregnant with twins, and they're jumping around inside of her, making her life very uncomfortable, and so she's going to plead with God. Why didn't she plead with God before? Okay, so it's just interesting how what the dynamic is there. And you have Isaac on one hand, and you have Rebecca, this very strong, independent woman that we're being introduced to here. Okay, so God didn't speak to Isaac to answer his plea in verse 21. Isaac pled with God, and God responded by no words, but poof, she becomes pregnant. Here,
Rabbi,
yes, Saul.
I know this is just a story, but when it says she pleaded with God, I assume she's praying and she doesn't have any relationship with God, but she's praying to this God. I mean, I've done it a lot of times, but I never
Right.
got anybody to respond to me.
Well,
How does that work? I know it's only a
as it
story.
work, right? So the issue is how it works is normally the way it works in verse 21, that Isaac prayed to God to for Rebecca to become fertile, and so when she does become, so does he plead to God just once, or is this an ongoing plea every day of their marriage? So that we don't know. Is it a one-time plea or an ongoing plea? And then if it's a one-time plea, then the answer isn't answered right away. It takes a while until a woman knows that she's pregnant, right? So the answer doesn't come right away. So the idea being that she becomes pregnant is an answer to a prayer. So lots of times, so when we pray, we don't know if our prayers are going to be answered, but things happen in our lives that if we wanted to, we could interpret them as answers to our prayer. Okay, so that I think is the way prayers are answered today. Like we pray, life goes on. Like what's the most common thing that we're praying for today? We pray for someone who is sick to get better. So do they get better? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If they get better, have our prayers then been answered? If they don't get better, have our prayers been answered or not been answered? So the way prayer works today is really a matter of, first, perspective on subsequent events, and also a matter of how we feel inside. So sometimes when we are praying for the health of someone, the fact that we are praying for them, just the fact that we are praying makes us feel better. It makes us feel as if we're doing something, that we're not totally helpless and totally out of control, that the situation is totally out of our hands, right? So prayer in that way can work that way. Rebecca is expecting, it seems like she's expecting an immediate response from God. And that, how does she have the nerve to expect that kind of immediate response? So the word for what she does to approach God is different from the word that Isaac uses to approach God. In 21, it's Vayetar Yitzchak. So that's translated as Isaac pleaded. Here it's Lidrosh et Adonai, the end of verse 22. So it's a different word. Vayetar and Lidrosh, two totally different words, right? So the word midrash comes from that same root for Lidrosh. So it's to seek, to look for an answer. Okay, so she was going to look for an answer from God about her situation with pregnancy. And so
I have to ask one
go
more
ahead.
question. At this point, does Isaac feel like he's an important person, or that Abraham was an important person? I mean, they were just Bedouins,
Right.
nomads.
Yeah.
Because he thought he was an important person,
Right.
he must think he has a relationship with God.
So I don't think that God has affirmed the covenant with Isaac personally. Right. No, it hasn't happened yet, but it will happen in this portion. But I believe he knows of something of this, of who God is and the relationship that Abraham has with this God, just in terms of Isaac and Abraham's experience together on Mount Moriah. Whatever happened on that mountain has certainly taught Isaac a lesson about God and God's relationship and Abraham's relationship with God. So even though the covenant is not being affirmed yet with Isaac, it will be in this portion. He knows that there is Adonai, and that Adonai can be spoken to and prayed to. Okay, so God does not verbally answer Isaac's prayer. God answers Isaac's prayer by making Rebekah pregnant. Rebekah seeks to ask of God for relief from the boys jumping up and around inside of her. And now God speaks to Rebekah. Verse 23, Vayomer Adonai la, God said to her, Shnei goyim bevitnech, two nations are in your stomach. Right? It's translated as womb, but it should be translated as stomach. The Torah has a word for womb, and it doesn't use it here. Rechem is womb. Beten is stomach. It doesn't matter. We get the idea. But so God says to her, there are two nations in your stomach, Ushnei leumim, and two nations mime'ayich, from your insides, two nations from your insides, yiparedu, will separate or will issue, but it means they will come out and be separate. Okay, there are two nations in your stomach, two nations will issue out of you and become separate. And what will happen to them? Ulaom milaom ye'ematz. One nation will become stronger from the other nation. The English says one people shall be mightier than the other. It's more than that. It's from one, the other will become strong, right? So one will take something away from the other in order to become stronger or be superior. V'rav ya'avod sa'ir, and the older will serve the younger. Okay? The older shall serve the younger. Okay, so this is the promise, the blessing, the prophecy that God shares with Rebecca. Okay, was it? So again, it gets to, as often I share about instances like this in the Torah. Did this happen as it's being recorded? Right? Is this historical narrative that is happening here, or was this story written after the fact? Right? Was this story in the Torah, of this part of the Torah, written when the people of Israel are already in the land of Israel and they're reacting to the idea that Seir, where Esau settles, and the nation of Edom, so the relationship between Israel and Edom, is it based on this prophecy, or was this written in a reaction to the relationship between Israel and Edom at the time that the story was written later in the land of Israel? So that's, biblical scholars ask that question, but this is what the story is. Okay, so so Rebecca gets to hear God's word, and God telling her that two great nations are going to come out of you. So 24, Vayimleu yameha laledet, her pregnancy came to term. Vehine tomim bevitna, and here are twins in her stomach. Vayetze harishon admoni, the first one came out all red-headed. Kulo ka'aderet se'ar, like a whole hairy mantle on him, all covered with hair. Vayikre'u shemo Esav, and they called him Esav. And Esav, down below, above the line, Esau there in the italics, the bold italics, the mantled one, possibly from the Arabic verb GHSW, to cover, to envelop. Right? In Arabic, the letter ayin is pronounced like a g, a hard G. That's why Aza in Hebrew is Gaza in English, because in Arabic, the ayin is a hard G. Okay, so that's why it's called the Gaza Strip, not the Aza Strip. Okay, so Esav could be Gesav, and if it's Gesav in Arabic, then it means to cover or to envelop, meaning he was all covered in hair. Okay, so in 26, Va'acharechein yatsa achiv, and after that came out his brother, V'yado ochezet ba'akev Esav, and his hand was holding the heel of Esav. Vayikra'u shemo Yaakov, and they called his name Yaakov, right? With the root there, because he was holding on to Esav's heel. Imagine that. So Esav's being born, and the feet come out, and whoa, there's a hand attached to that foot, and Jacob's body comes out. Okay, so because he's grabbing onto Esav's heel, that's why he got the name Jacob, Yaakov. Veyitzchak ben shishim shana beledet otam, and Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. Now, first, Isaac and Rebekah got married. Isaac was 40 years old when they got married, right? That's what it says in verse 20, the second sentence of our portion. Now in verse 26, all of this has happened. 20 years have transpired until Jacob and Esau are born. How long was she barren for? According to this story, she's barren for 19 years or so. That's a long time to be barren, right? Abraham and Sarah were barren for even longer. And there's that gets to a question in Jewish law. According to halacha, a couple should stay married for 10 years while the wife is barren, but after 10 years, that's grounds for divorce. Because ultimately, the purpose of marriage is to fulfill the very first commandment in the entire Torah, pru urvu, to be fruitful and multiply. So the rabbis give a couple 10 years to be married, to try to fulfill that commandment. And if not, then this is a commandment that's incumbent upon the man, not the woman, right? Even though the woman is doing all the work of being pregnant and carrying the fetus to term, the mitzvah of fulfilling the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply is the man's mitzvah to fulfill. So I'm just saying traditionally, there are modern ways to understand the mitzvah. I'm just saying traditionally, the mitzvah is understood as the husband's mitzvah to fulfill, right? This doesn't take into account homosexual marriages, which according to conservative movement Jewish law is perfectly acceptable. So how do a lesbian couple fulfill the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply? There are ways to do that, and surrogacy and adoption are two acceptable conservative movement halachic ways of fulfilling the mitzvah. Okay, but I digress. The point is that according to Jewish law, a couple can stay married for 10 years, but then it's incumbent upon the husband to divorce the wife because he still has to fulfill the mitzvah. And the husband needs to find another wife in order to fulfill the mitzvah. So there are questions here that the rabbis ask. Why did Abraham stay married to Sarah for such a long time? Why did he wait so long to marry Hagar to fulfill the mitzvah? Why did Isaac stay married to Rebekah for so long, 19 years, until she got pregnant? So, the Midrash always comes around and says the patriarchs and matriarchs are different from us today. And
Rabbi,
yes,
yeah.
Sumner.
I guess the indication here is that it's never the man's problem.
Right, that's true. That is true. Right. Well, you see, halachically, then there are questions. Then, so according to Jewish law, if you divorce your wife after 10 years of being infertile, and then you marry somebody else, and then she's still infertile, then the question will be, is the husband at fault, and not the woman, right? So again, I don't want to get into all those details, but yes, Jewish law in the time of the rabbis was sexist and biased to the man, never assuming that it's the man's fault, right? Or that the woman has a say in the marriage. A couple could stay married, but it was frowned upon in rabbinic times for a couple to stay married without having a child. Okay, so all right, so that's point number one. He's 60 years old when they get married. Point number two is we don't see anything wrong here with with Jacob or Esau, right? There is nothing from what we've seen so far to give the impression that Jacob is favored over Esau yet, and why that would be the case. And even if I read a couple, let's read a couple more verses. Vayigdalu hane'arim, the boys grew up. Vayehi Esav ish yodeat sayid. Esav became a man who knew how to hunt. Ish sadeh, a man of the field, an outdoorsman. V'Yaakov ish tam yoshev ohalim. And Jacob was a simple guy. He stayed at home. He sat in a tent. So Esau was the outdoorsy kind and knew how to hunt and knew how to live like a survivalist. Jacob stayed at home. A simple man, ish tam, a simple man. Could be pure, could be innocent, simple, any one of those definitions. Sat in the tent. Okay, and verse 28, Vaye'ehav Yitzchak et Esav, Kitzayid bafiv. Isaac loved Esau because hunting was in his mouth. That, in other words, he was a natural born hunter. V'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov, and Rivka loved Yaakov. Okay, so now why? Is there anything wrong with that? No. We know as parents and psychologically, it's not nice. No, it's not that it's not nice. It's not good for a parent to favor one child over the other. Okay, so clearly Isaac is favoring Esau over Jacob. It doesn't say that he loved both of them, but he preferred Esau. It just says that he loved Esau. And Rivka doesn't say that she loved both of them, but preferred Jacob. It just says that she loved Jacob. Okay, so that just lays the groundwork for what's coming up. And we've read the story before many times over the years, so we know what's going to happen. So this is laying the groundwork for us. But again, there's nothing wrong from the Torah here about Esau being a hunter. We only know in Jewish law that it's forbidden to hunt for food. And even some would say it's forbidden to hunt for sport. But certainly to hunt for food is forbidden. That's not the way to consume animals. An animal has to be a domestic animal and be taken to be slaughtered. You can't just hunt a cow or hunt a deer with your bow and arrow or however you're going to hunt. That's not an acceptable way of killing an animal for consumption. Also, according to Jewish law, it's not appropriate to hunt because it's because of sa'ar ba'alei chayim, causing suffering and pain to animals. So that's just not something we're supposed to do. So according to Jewish law, you're not supposed to do this. But Jewish law hasn't come around yet when Esau and Jacob are born. Okay, so still, we could have, the only impression we have without knowing the Midrash is that Esau's a hunter, and that what we know about hunting according to Jewish law, we might apply to this story. And then we could realize, hey, we're applying something later that comes later in history to something that hasn't happened yet. That history hasn't happened yet. Jewish law hasn't been taught yet. So it's not fair to say that Esau is violating Jewish law because Jewish law hadn't been taught yet. So from the Torah so far, there's nothing wrong with Esau and nothing wrong with Jacob. But which, of course, we know the Midrash, that the Midrash teaches terrible things about Esau. Esau's an idolater. Esau is a killer at heart, an evil man. And so the rabbis look back into the story to give hints as to how we know how terrible Esau is and how wonderful Jacob is. All right, so back to verse 22, Vayit rotzatsu habanim bekirba, the boys are running around inside of her. The fantastic fantasy-filled midrash based on that is there are a number of points about the midrash that are so anachronistic. So it says the midrash said, whenever Rebecca would be walking by a place of idol worship, Esau would be the one clamoring to get out of the womb and to be born, because he wanted to be there with the idol worship. And whenever she would walk by the house of study of Shem and Aver, so Shem is Noah's son, and Aver is Noah's grandson or great-grandson. And according to the rabbis, the Shem and Aver established a rabbinical academy in the land of Israel. All right, pure fantasy, but again, to highlight to serve the rabbis' purpose, that the rabbis didn't create their method of study and their form of Judaism out of whole cloth. They read it back into the Torah itself to say that that rabbinic thinking goes all the way back to the land of Israel, to the time of Noah and Abraham. So whenever Rebecca walked by the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, then Jacob was clamoring to get out. Okay, so that's the classic midrash about this. So it's funny and ridiculous in some ways that the rabbis would teach that, but it becomes such a popular midrash, right? That all kids who go to day school, whether it's Orthodox day school or community day school, learn that midrash. And so it becomes so ingrained in Jewish studies that you think that that's the truth, that Esau was a born idolater and Jacob was a born rabbi. And that's the power of the story from the midrash that comes out of this. And it's hard to then forget that distraction and just look at the story itself, and that Esau's not a bad guy. Esau just is a hairy guy who likes to hunt, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if anybody's bad in this story, it's Jacob in this story, because we'll look at the 29 to 34 on page 148. Let's look at that quickly, and we'll see that Jacob comes across bad. Jacob is a homebody, Esau is an outdoorsman. Verse 29, Vayazed Yaakov Nazid, Jacob was cooking stew. Vayavo Esav min hasadeh v'hu ayef, and Esau came back from the field, and he's tired from a day outdoors, or maybe from a week outdoors. Who knows how long he was away on his hunting trip. But Yaakov was home cooking stew. 30. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov, hal iteni na min ha'adom hazeh, ki ayef anochi, al kain karashmo Edom. Esau said to Jacob, please pour me serve me, pour me, ladle me out, please, from this red stuff, because I'm tired, I'm famished. Therefore, parenthetically, they called his name Edom. All right, so Esau is the father of the Edomite nation. Why are they called the Edomites? Because he ate this red stew. Okay, 31, Vayomer Yaakov says, Michrach hayom et bechoratcha li. You want the stew? Okay, well, sell me your firstborn status, your birthright. Sell me your birthright. And so Esau, Vayomer Esav, Ine anochi holech lamut, v'lama ze li bechorah. Esau says, I'm about to die. What do I need a birthright for? I'm famished. Give me the stew. What do I care about birthright? Here's the birthright. Give me the stew. Vayomer Yaakov, Hishava li kayom. Vayishava lo, vayimkor bechorato liYaakov. Yaakov says, well, it's not enough that you're just saying you're going to give it to me. Swear to me today. And he swore to him, and he sold him his birthright to Jacob. V'Yaakov natan le'esav lechem unezid adashim vayochal vayesht vayakam vayelach vayivez Esav et habechorah. Jacob gave Esau bread and this lentil stew, and he ate, drank, got up, and went and wasted. Esau wasted the, or spurned, it says here, the birthright. Okay, these verbs come in successive order there. It's a quick, rash action by Esau. But again, making the Midrash makes Esau to be the fool here. And Jacob's not doing anything wrong. Jacob's just fulfilling his prophecy that perhaps Rebekah had given. And since this Midrash has to read a lot into the story to excuse Jacob's behavior. So, because we know in the end that when we pray 3 times a day, we're praying Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. We're not saying Elohei Esav, right? We're not descended from Esav, we're descended from Jacob. So the rabbis know we have to make the story look good as it can. So the details are Jacob doesn't come across as a good guy here, who for anybody has any kind of conditions for giving food away for someone who's famished. You just don't do this. This isn't appropriate behavior, not to a stranger, let alone not to family. Okay, so they're doing this because the rabbis do by understanding Jacob ends up being a patriarch. We have to make him look good. So we're saying that he knew the prophecy that God gave to Rebekah. And since Rebekah loves Jacob, Rebekah wants to be sure that Jacob is the one who's going to be the stronger nation. So Jacob says, I'll take matters into my own hand then. I'll get the birthright fair and square. I'll give him stew for the sake of getting the birthright. Even this makes it seem a lot worse, a lot of conniving here on Jacob's part. And I think if we read the story the way the Torah presents it from here all the way through to the rest of Genesis, if we read it that way, there's a lot of things that Jacob and his children do wrong that even though the rabbis try to make it look better, it's important for us to know that they're just human beings acting in this way, and a lot of faults, psychological faults that they have that impact then future events, right? So the Jacob conniving here, well, we're going to see lots of stories. One story later in this portion about how he gets the blessing from Isaac instead of Esau. There's conniving that happens there. And there's more conniving that happens, the punishment for the conniving happens in next week's portion too. And even affects Jacob and Esau's reunion and just the way that each of them holds each other in each other's eyes. So that's what I wanted to talk about with the beginning of this portion today. Any other questions or comments about this? So then I wish everybody a good rest of the day, and we pray for peace in Israel, and we'll see you next Wednesday for another Torah study next week.
Yasher Koach, John.
Okay, have a good rest of the day.
Have a good day, everybody.